I think it is clear to believe in the power of ideas.
Fresh thinking to the Manhattan Institute.
Good afternoon. I'm Larry Mohn. I'm president of the Manhattan Institute. I want to thank you all for coming. It's great to have so many smart people sharing ideas and perspectives on the important issue of infrastructure financing. In order to maintain our existing infrastructure and have any hope of building vital new projects, policymakers are going to have to really begin to think anew and come up with innovative ways to tap into global capital markets and expand the private sector role in public transportation. Our luncheon speaker today, Transportation Secretary Mary Peters, has spent more than 2 decades grappling with infrastructure financing issues and has earned a reputation as an innovative leader and a strong advocate for the effective use of taxpayer dollars. We are delighted to have her with us today. Secretary Peters brings a unique perspective to her role as the nation's transportation chief. Having spent her career working on transportation issues both at the state and federal level and in public and private sector. She began her career at the Arizona Department of Transportation, where she rose through the ranks to become the agency's director in 1998. She then went to work for HDR, a major engineering firm, as their national director for transportation policy and consulting. In 2001, President Bush asked her to come to Washington to lead the Federal Highway Administration. As FHA administrator, she placed special emphasis on finding new ways to invest in road and bridge construction, including innovative public-private partnerships that help build roads faster and at less expense. In September 2006, she was nominated by President Bush and confirmed by the U.S. Senate to serve as the nation's 15th Secretary of Transportation. Over the past 2 years, she has worked hard to tackle the department's most pressing challenges, including fighting congestion, hooray, across all modes of transportation, improving safety, and addressing strains on traditional sources of infrastructure project financing. Please join me in welcoming the Secretary of Transportation, Mary Peters.
Apologize for that long resume. We won't do that again. Good afternoon, everyone. You know, Larry, a little-known fact is back when I was in Arizona at the Department of Transportation there, this was in the mid to late 1980s, I thought, you know, a toll road would really help us get some more revenue here in Arizona and possibly expand some of our opportunities in a high-growth state. And I probably should have just gone and slammed the door on my head instead of having that idea, because that's about how effective I was at that point in time. But it was the birth of an idea back then, and one that they're finally now coming back around to, even in my home state. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I feel like I'm probably the most unqualified person in this room as I look around and see the expertise, Larry, that you have assembled here today at the Manhattan Institute and the good topics that you've had for discussion this morning. So I'd like to share a few of my ideas with you, but then engage in some question-answer discussion a little bit so that I can benefit from all of your knowledge as well. And to talk about where we might go in the future in terms of financing for infrastructure, and really the topic of your session here today, what is the private role in public infrastructure? I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for that role, and look forward to our discussion, learning more about it. This organization, the Manhattan Institute, has done so much to advance policy in areas like welfare reform, education, public safety, putting the intellectual capital of this organization and those who are part of it to work on some of the most important issues that America has faced and will face in the future, and having all of that energy and all of your energy put forward to talking about infrastructure issues is something that I am just delighted to have the opportunity to be part of this afternoon. Your leadership, the discussions that you have today and where we go in the future with these discussions is going to be pivotal in making sure that the United States completes the transition to a 21st century transportation system, or whether or not we stay mired back in the 20th century. It will make the difference about whether or not we can keep New York and our country competitive in the global marketplace in which we compete, whether we can keep our people mobile, whether our infrastructure is in good working order, or we're constantly scrambling to fix things because we can't afford to repair or replace them the way we should. We're living with the result today of depending for too long on 20th century solutions. New Yorkers, for example, are dealing every day with aviation delays, lengthening daily commutes, and growing gridlock that makes taking a trip across Manhattan about as predictable as predicting the next Top Chef. And like Wall Street itself, we're battling a crisis of confidence in transportation. Every year, Americans routinely reject new taxes and new debt for transportation projects. It is, in my opinion, a crisis of consumer confidence, a crisis of investor confidence, because it's not that they don't want better commutes. It's not that they don't want better transportation infrastructure and less delays. They have no confidence in the public sector's ability and the government's ability to deliver different or better results. They know that the current system is failing them badly, and they for no reason want to put any more money into that, even though they do want solutions. But there are roads, there are solutions, and there are areas where it's working very well in the United States today. California's Highway 91 in Orange County. Have any of you had a chance to go out there and see that road? I went early on, and this people were calling it the Lexus lanes. Do you remember that back then? The Lexus lanes. And it was the day I wish I had a camera, a Kodak moment. Sitting stuck in traffic was a Rolls Royce. I'm not kidding, a Rolls Royce. And zipping along was like a Geo Metro, something like that, that was zipping along in the priced lanes. And it really told me that these roads can work. I was also early on under the impression that 10% of the people who use that corridor would use it 90% of the time. In fact, the opposite is true. 90% of the people use it 10% of the time. They use it when they need to get where they're going and get there on time. And it is working today to keep traffic congestion down, to keep that road flowing, to give people reliability and predictability in terms of their commutes. And there are cities like Chicago, John, great work that you all are doing in Chicago, Minneapolis, Miami, that are relieving stubborn bottlenecks almost overnight without building a single new mile of roadway. Thanks to sensor technology or hot lanes or even parking meters and lots, we're able to use the power of pricing to deliver faster commutes, better transit, and cleaner air, and we are able to do that today. There are states like Indiana, Florida, and Texas that are funding ambitious new infrastructure programs today without raising gas taxes, without going to Congress and asking for a single earmark. They're moving forward. Instead, these forward-leaning states are looking at the private sector, and they're determining in the private sector where they can find eager partners to help them accomplish the projects that they want to build. Governor Mitch Daniels, for example, his very bold move to lease the Indiana Toll Road project brought in $3.85 billion to fund the capital projects in the state's Major Move program. The only state, to my knowledge, that has a fully funded transportation program, 10-year transportation program, today is Indiana, based on what they were able to achieve with this particular deal. Moreover, the private concern, Cintra, now has responsibility for the upkeep of the 157-mile road, which was in need of costly renovation, maintenance, and repairs at the time. Some of you may have heard Governor Daniels say this, but they're actually losing money on some segments of the toll road to the point that he suggested instead of having toll collectors out there collecting the tolls, which in some cases were as little as 15 cents, he should simply put a cigar box down on the pavement and take a chance that people would throw their money in it as they went by. He figured they would lose less money that way. Today, they're using the money by monetizing that asset to fully fund a state 10-year transportation program. Others have partnered with the private sector to finance, build, and operate new projects as well. And a very good example is Virginia's agreement with Transurban and Fluor Enterprises on a $1.8 billion project that will add new hot lanes to the capital's Beltway, one of the most congested highways in the United States today, and people will have an opportunity to travel at near posted highway speeds on these hot lanes and to do so in the very near future. Interest, though, isn't limited to highways. On Tuesday, Mayor Daley in Chicago announced a private firm is prepared to pay Chicago $2.25 billion to take over operation of Midway Airport. It's a deal that we need to and will review at the U.S. Department of Transportation, but the concept, I have to tell you, is very, very strong, and the leadership that Mayor Daley is providing there in Chicago is something to be emulated around the United States. Excuse me. And it's the direction that we need to head with America. In America, we've been a little slow to grasp this concept, this unprecedented innovation that is taking place in transportation financing around the world. And frankly, by being so slow to take a grasp of this, it is making our ability to compete in a global economy that relies on efficient transportation infrastructure less. I often say that our transportation system can either be a brake or an accelerator on our economy. And I'm afraid that we're getting into the brake side of that, where we're hampering our ability to grow economically in the United States because we're not taking advantage of new ways to finance projects and get them built significantly faster. Around the world, countries as diverse as Canada, France, Spain, England, Italy, China, Mexico, and India routinely use private capital to finance transportation infrastructure improvements. Russia has a pipeline of public-private partnership projects that are lined up that will involve hundreds of billions of dollars in private sector investment. Yet when I arrived at the Federal Highway Administration in Washington in 2001, there was very little talk of market forces or public-private partnerships in transportation. And in fact, we were talking about the ARTBA, public-private partnership. They have an annual event. Two tables in this room would have been the entire attendance of that forum at that particular time. Today, hundreds of people attend that event, and it is a very, very important event. We are warming up to these ideas. And with the very active encouragement of the Bush administration, we are able to change the way America is thinking about how we finance infrastructure. We've developed, for example, model public-private partnership legislation and encouraged states to modernize their law. Today, I'm proud to say that a total of 25 states have P3 authority, and some of it very, very viable authority that they're able to move forward with very quickly. We've reached out to innovative municipal leaders with our urban partnerships programs and congestion reduction grants. And as we sat stuck in traffic today as we were coming over here after we got off the train at Penn Station, I was going, darn, I sure wish that congestion pricing program were in place here in New York City today. I think we could have gotten here a little bit more quickly than we otherwise did today. Thanks to tremendous leadership with Mayor Bloomberg and others in this city. And I don't think they're done yet. I think there are other opportunities, and with Governor Patterson's great leadership in naming today, as you mentioned, a commission to look at public-private partnerships, I don't think that idea is over entirely yet. So look forward to hearing them now. We've had an opportunity through some of these programs to make market incentives available to airports and to carriers, and they're helping spread the flights more evenly throughout the day. We believe that this is an initiative that can work. Oh, that I wish the Port Authority were on board with us today as well on that, but we're going to keep working on them also, because we think using pricing to spread demand over the time of day can make your flight into New York City less painful than my drive over here was today, or your drive was today as well. We're also reaching out to innovative municipal leaders with other urban partnership programs and congestion reduction grants. And they've responded with very, very potent, very, very viable ideas using technology, pricing, and transit to fight congestion. And some of those projects, like the Miami Hot Lanes, are already operating today and providing relief to the citizens of Miami. We've made very aggressive use of the private activity bonds and the TIFIA loans and programs like interstate tolling, the Corridors of the Future, and the Federal Transit Administration's PENTA-P, or the Public-Private Partnership Pilot Program, say that 3 times fast, that we have going on now in the transit sector, to engage the private sector in very creative ways to think about how we fund transit. From the Chicago Skyway to the Capitol Beltway to the Hiawatha Light Rail Line, private sector partnerships are becoming the preferred model of adding significant new capacity to America's infrastructure. In fact, we have recently concluded a comprehensive review of innovative financing projects throughout the United States. And what that study found was that more transportation public-private partnerships have been completed over the last 3 years than in any comparable period in all of the United States history, just in the last 3 years. So we're coming around up to this idea much more so. Another 20 major highway and transit projects involving partnerships with the private sector are at various stages of development in California, in Kentucky, in Louisiana, Nevada, Ohio, Texas, many other states. Had an opportunity to talk with Governor Barbour from Mississippi recently, and they're very proud that they have their first ever legislation there in Mississippi as well. And just this week, as we discussed, Governor Patterson announced a very special commission to work on public-private partnerships for the New York State area, preparing this state and positioning this state to more effectively have an opportunity to make long-term capital investments, even in periods of economic stress. And boy, we all know that we're in a period of economic stress right now. Now, I recognize that that stress that is in the market right now is causing some upheaval. One implication is that states and municipalities will have a more difficult time borrowing, even as they have to fill ever-growing gaps in their budgets. And you all have seen that in this city. Municipal bond issues have either been put back or gone forward with very high rates of interest just in the very recent past in the city here. We know that those municipalities need to continue to find funds to build their infrastructure projects. And of course, while I'm talking to you about transportation infrastructure today, highways, bridges, transit projects, airports, et cetera, infrastructure across the broad range is going to suffer from lack of investment, I think, in our local and state governments because of this economic situation that we're in today. And again, the private sector has the capability to step up in those areas as well. Infrastructure funds can continue to grow here in the United States, and I think the offer that was received on Midway Airport by Chicago just this week is very good evidence that there certainly is still money to be invested when projects are well thought out, and when you have, and I think this is critically important, strong political leadership to move those projects forward. Transportation can represent a very, very attractive investment, a solid asset with real value that will produce a revenue stream over time, a patient investor, but one that gives a good opportunity for return and a very low probability of risk. Long term, the trends are very clear. The private sector, I believe, has to play a major role in modernizing America's transportation infrastructure. Our roads, our bridges, our subways, our seaports, our air traffic control system. Boy, would I like to get my hands on that one. There is an opportunity for ripe things to do in that area. Public-private partnerships are an essential part of this modern transportation funding. And these partnerships do more than just bring more funding to the table. They reduce project costs. They accelerate project delivery, and they allow states and municipalities to greatly leverage available public resources. So as we see fewer and fewer public resources available in the future, even more opportunity exists, I believe, to leverage those resources with private sector investment and to take advantage of really being able to get those investments in and build infrastructure here in the United States. Over the past 8 years, we in the Bush administration have supported record-level federal investments in America's highways and bridges. We've nearly doubled the funding for transit, and we've invested $50 billion in airports, runways, and in aviation technology. But there is no question in my mind that we could have made better use of that money had we leveraged it with private sector money. And there is no question in my mind that our most important legacy will be the unprecedented innovation that we have been able to light the fire under in terms of the way transportation is funded in America, in the way it's financed, built, and operated. I really believe that we are on the cusp of a major, major change here in the United States that will take us into where we need to be in the future instead of locked into the past. Now, as I was telling some folks at the table here, I am the incurable, if not often disillusioned optimist. But I believe out of the current economic crisis that we're dealing with here in the United States today, perhaps out of necessity, we will move forward more so to embrace private sector funding in infrastructure across the broad range. And I think that is very, very good for America at the end of the day. The challenge we have today, though, is translating these very good examples that I have talked about today into a national policy that will deliver fewer traffic tie-ups in the air and on the ground, translate into providing better transit services for us, a stronger economy, and, importantly, and something Mayor Bloomberg certainly had embraced here in the New York City area, a cleaner environment, an environment that has less CO2 emissions. The Bush administration has proposed a massive reform project for surface transportation because we know that next year, very early next year, the next administration, the next Congress is going to have to take up the topic of surface transportation. There simply is not the luxury, as was there in 2003 when the last act expired, to continue to extend that act over 22 months and 12 extensions because there was money in the account, so to speak, that could carry it over during that period of time. That simply is not the case today at all. And sadly, it will be next year before Congress takes that up, but very, very important that they do so, and they do so with an eye toward reform, with an eye toward refocusing and renewing our focus on transportation in the U.S., how we finance it, how we build it, how we operate it, how we can use the concept of pricing to make much better use of our infrastructure than we're doing today. There is a clear role for the federal government in helping spread these effective solutions across the country and making them more part of the norm. And it is very important that the federal government, as they take up the next surface transportation bill, and hopefully also complete the work on the aviation bill, the aviation authorization bill also, that they keep an eye toward these really good opportunities to bring additional investment to the table. The federal government has to get out of the business of micromanaging processes. We have to get out of the business of limiting the flexibility of cities and states and the private sector to innovate. You know, just recently, we turned down an application from the state of Pennsylvania to toll I-80 because the current state law is so restrictive that it simply would not allow that to happen. And there were other opportunities and will be other opportunities, but that's how restrictive the laws are today. Federal policy, instead of limiting the opportunities to bring private capital to the table, ought to be able to promote accountability, to promote rational investment decisions, but Washington should not stand in the way of change. And in my estimation, and working with Frank McArdle as I did on a commission last year, I believe that the federal government's touch has to be very light. Only those things that truly the federal government should be involved in, and leave many, many decisions to state and local governments where you know much better what you need, how to pay for it, and how to attract the right kind of proposals to do that. And some of the most exciting ideas that we're seeing today have been proposed, like the congestion pilot program right here in New York, in Manhattan, that would have made a big difference in this city. Some of my most disappointing moments of secretary, however, have been those seeing plans like that scuttled by entrenched interests who just seek to thwart any attempt at meaningful change, to reject it out of hand. Steve and I had an opportunity to talk a little bit before we came into the reception today, and Steve, I think you hit the nail on the head. Those who are CEOs, those who have to operate cities, states, municipalities, understand what they have to do to attract the right resources to bring to the table and what it takes to operate those resources. Mayor Daley is an example of that. Governor Patterson is an example of that. Governor Rendell is an example of that. Mayor Bloomberg is an example of that. Yet we have people in Congress who can't look behind the policy to see what really has to happen to make these programs work and work well, and to facilitate really meaningful change that can help our state and local partners instead of hinder them from what they want to do. Now, even as frustrated as I have been about some of these that have not turned out the way I would have liked, that has not and will not stop me from continuing until the very last day of this administration to beat the drum for the kind of reform that we have to have in the future. And I urge all of you in this room, all of you who have the capability and the audience to do that, is don't let it stop you either. Again, 8 years ago, we were hardly talking about this. Today, we're talking about it a lot. Today, we're seeing examples of projects that have been successful, and we can in the future. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher used to say, "You may have to fight a battle more than once to win it." Well, indeed, we may have to fight these battles more than once, but it is a worthy goal to continue on the path we're on and try to seek new and better ways of investing in transportation in America. New York City here represents a microcosm of what's happening in cities across America. Historic transportation systems are failing, gridlock is growing, and the battle with the forces of stagnation is joined. So join me, if you will, in continuing to fight for relief, the relief from honking horns, the relief from polluting tailpipes, and the endless flight delays. Join me in working together for reliable transportation choices so New Yorkers can walk out of their doors and know how long it will take them to get across town, whether they're traveling by taxi or transit or on foot. Join me, if you will, in raising New York stock by giving this city a 21st century transportation system, a system that is marked by innovation, by efficiency, and by choice. Because, as has happened so many times in the past and throughout our history, when New York blazes the trail, the country will follow New York City. Thank you all so much for listening to my remarks, and now let's open it up for dialogue. Thank you. And I think Larry's going to help me moderate here a little bit, so Larry, if you would.
Secretary, could we answer some questions? Please wait till I acknowledge you and wait for the microphone to get to you. We want everybody to hear your questions. Questions? Michael?
Is that Philip?
I'll tell you, we'll do Steve Savage and then Michael Myers. Okay.
Is anything going on with respect to bus privatization?
Steve, and in terms of municipal transit authorities, some more to do with the acquisition of the assets themselves as opposed to the operation of the system. But again, I think there is a real opportunity, Steve, to bring more investment, more private sector investment into that arena. For example, building bus terminals with the private sector so that they are centers where people can drop a child off at daycare, pick up dry cleaning, do a variety of things, maybe shop at a market before they go on home from their bus stop. Those are the type of things that I think can bring more private investment, but not as much as we would like. Now, we are working with Houston on 2 projects under our PEN-to-P, or the Public-Private Partnerships for Public Transit program, and I believe that we'll see some very innovative things come out of that. Thank you.
Michael Myers, New York Civil Rights Coalition. Madam Secretary, don't you think that the current financial crisis has changed the climate with respect to public-private partnerships? We don't even know what private funding is anymore in terms of the government taking over corporations like AIG and funding private sector. And doesn't that fuel cynicism on the part of the population and change the possibilities for PPPs? And with respect to congestion pricing, the subways and buses in New York City are already overcrowded. You can't get in them. They're overrun. And so my question to you on that is, why can't we even get a bullet train to Washington, D.C. from New York, and from New York to Boston? A truly fast train as opposed to Amtrak or Acela, which is not fast.
But it's faster than flying. I took it this morning. Michael, you raised some good issues, and I think that is a real dilemma and something that we should discuss. Is the current economic situation poisoning the well for public-private partnerships? Is it going to make it more difficult in the future? Is there even going to be money to invest? I can assure you of one thing. Government does not create wealth. Government does not create capital. So if we continue to depend almost solely on government, we're not going to meet the needs that we have in the future. In fact, I think, Michael, with more competition for fewer resources, where discretionary spending comes in, there may be even more of an appetite, perhaps an appetite of necessity, to go to the private sector and attract additional funds. Does public interest need to be protected? Absolutely. It does need to be protected. And again, I believe we can do that with a light touch rather than a heavy touch. Others may feel differently, but we can protect public interest and still attract private sector investment. And I think it's going to be incumbent on us to find the right way to do that, or we're simply going to shut down spending for infrastructure in the United States, which we scarcely can afford to do. We're already behind the power curve in terms of what we need to build today. So if we can structure these deals right, I think we can. Congestion pricing. If congestion pricing works and works the way it should, it will send price signals about where we need to expand capacity. It will send price signals about where we have the ability to move some flights or some trains or some others out of the peak period into non-peak periods and attract ridership in those areas. But it also, again, will really speak to where we need to add new flights, new train cars, things like that, so that we can meet the capacity needs in the future. I firmly believe that price signals, rather than government choosing which project should go forward, government choosing which project should give earmarks is the right way to go in the future. And let me close with talking about bullet trains. Interestingly, just last evening, the Senate passed a transportation bill on Amtrak and on rail safety. And in that bill, it provides a couple of things that I think are very important. One is the opportunity to look at some of these high-speed trains along the Eastern Corridor, as you've talked about, and we'll, should that bill be signed into law, move out very rapidly to make that happen. But the other very important part of that bill that I think is something that we announced earlier this week, for the first time ever in the United States, we had $30 million to make available as matching grants to state and local governments to expand rail services into their area. Today, all the money went, or before this, all the money went to Amtrak directly. Today, that money is made available to cities like Richmond, like Seattle, like other cities around the nation, Phoenix, Tucson area, to attract some private investment, couple that with some of the investment of their own, public investment, and to look at these high-speed rail corridor areas and determine whether or not they're viable in the future. And that allows me, and I know this is a long answer, but to segue into something that I think is very important. For too long in the United States, we have talked about solving transportation demand or transportation challenges with modal-specific solutions. You just need another highway lane. If it was only 4-lane into that area, everything would be fine. You just need another transit train. You need one more train on this route. You need this, you need that. We need to look at transportation demand in a holistic sense of transportation. And if here in the Eastern Seaboard, especially in the Northeast, if a high-speed train is a better answer because we can't expand the capacity of Newark Airport, then let us embrace and invest in that solution, not in the solution that's driven by the color of the money. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, then go right ahead. I could just stand up and ask it. Well, we just want to make sure everybody else hears it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Secretary Peters. That was a terrific speech. I have what recommendations would you give to the incoming administration, whomever, on what legislation would best promote public-private partnerships going forward?
Yeah, Bill, a great question. The first thing that I would say to them is private activity bonds. We had the authority in the current surface transportation bill for $15 billion of private activity bonds, and we will, by early next year, basically have dibs, if you will, on all of that money. We could have authorized a lot more. So I think that's the very first thing I would say to them is take the cap off, if you will, of private activity bonds and create more opportunity for that kind of money to be available. I think continuing to fund the TIFIA program and making some of the requirements more broadly eligible and making the process quicker is something else I would do. We may, for the first time ever in the very near future, have to say no to people who apply for TIFIA loans because there won't be enough money there, and Congress, of course, intends to take that money away from us in the future. That is exactly the wrong thing that we should do. And finally, I would say that if we want to attract private sector investment, I would say to the next administration, don't put up barriers. Certainly protect public interest, and there are ways to protect the public interest without creating barriers that would basically drive away private investment. The two can work and can work well together. We've seen examples of that. So light touch, as I say it, protect the public interest, but don't do so in a manner that you drive away or drive up the cost of private investment. Thank you.
That's it. Well, thank you, Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership on this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think it is clear how fortunate we are to believe in the power of ideas.
Supply the common sense and the fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.